Our speaker today is this very handsome Jeff Fisher. Jeff and his lovely wife, Ann, is he red yet? Yeah, he is. That worked. Have been members of our congregation since 2007. Jeff has been a past board member and finance chair, among other positions. As a business owner, he's always busy, but has carved some time to share his speaking talents with us. A fitness enthusiast and dangerous poker player, Jeff is a multi-talented individual who helps our fellowship in many ways. We welcome him to our sacred space. Let us enter into worship together. You're all waking up. Our opening words this morning are from Carolyn Owen Toll. Come into this house of worship. Come in bringing all of who you are. Rest and quiet your weak, worn spirit, for you are here to touch again eternal springs of hope and renewal. Calm your hurried pace. For this hour, let the cares, the fretfulness, and the worry be set aside. Forgive yourself. You are so very worthy of moving on, of making new efforts, of trying again. Know that you are not alone. There is strength and caring support for you here. You will find comfort if you but ask. Look around. You are part of a potential community. You can make it what you will. Enter into this house of worship. And now, for the young and young at heart, you are welcome to come sit near Angela, and that way you'll be able to see the pictures better, so you might want to do that. And she has a message for all ages.
Good morning. How's everybody doing? Good. So, I have a question for you before we read our story. Have you ever been told... Hello, friends. Have you ever been told that you are too little to do something you want to do? Yeah? Have you ever been told you can't do something because you're a girl or because you're a boy? No. Have you ever seen a friend be told you can't do that because you're a girl or because you're a boy? You have? Yeah, sometimes that happens. Or because you're too old? So this is a story called Drum Dream Girl. And it is by Margarita Engel. And I'm going to read it to you. It's about figuring out how to do something you're told you can't do. On an island of music, in a city of drum beats, the drum dream girl dreamed of pounding tall conga drums, tapping small bongo drums, and boom, boom, booming with long, loud sticks on big, round, silvery, moon-bright timbales. But everyone on the island of music in the city of drum beats believed that only boys should play drums. So the drum dream girl had to keep dreaming quiet, secret, drumbeat dreams. At outdoor cafes that looked like gardens, she heard drums played by men. When she closed her eyes, she could also hear her own imaginary music. When she walked under wind-wavy palm trees in a flower-bright park, she heard the whir of parrot wings, the clack of woodpecker beats, the dancing tap of her own footsteps, and the comforting pat of her own heartbeat. At carnivals, she listened to the rattling beat of towering dancers on stilts and the dragon clang of costumed drummers wearing huge masks. At home, her fingertips rolled out their own dreamy drum rhythm on tables and chairs. And even though everyone kept reminding her that girls on the island of music had never played drums, the brave drum dream girl dared to play tall conga drums, small bongo drums, and big, round, silvery, moon-bright timbales. Her hands seemed to fly as they rippled, rapped, and pounded all the rhythms of her drum dreams. Her big sisters were so excited that they invited her to join their all-girl dance band, but their father said only boys should play drums. So the drum dream girl had to keep dreaming and drumming alone until finally her father offered to find a music teacher who could decide if her drums deserved to be heard. The drum dream girl's teacher was amazed. The girl knew so much, but he taught her more and more and more. And she practiced, and she practiced, and she practiced, until the teacher agreed that she was ready to play her small bongo drums outdoors at a starlit cafe that looked like a garden, where everyone who heard her dream-bright music sang and danced and decided that girls should always be allowed to play drums, and both girls and boys should feel free to dream. That's our story. Let's go to class.
Our reading this morning is titled The Gates of Hope, and it's from Victoria Safford. Our mission is to plant ourselves at the gates of hope, not the prudent gates of optimism, which are somewhat narrower, not the stalwart, boring gates of common sense, not the strident gates of self-righteousness, which creak on shrill and angry hinges. People cannot hear us there. They cannot pass through. Not the cheerful, flimsy garden gates of everything is going to be all right, but a different, sometimes lonely place, the place of truth-telling about our own soul first of all and its condition, the place of resistance and defiance, the piece of ground from which you see the world, both as it is and as it could be, as it will be, the place from which you glimpse not only struggle, but joy in the struggle, and we stand there beckoning and calling, telling people what we are seeing, asking people what they see. Thanks, Priscilla. Nothing like being put on the spot. Priscilla didn't expect to have to be the only musician this morning, but she's doing an admirable job, I might say. We had an option to go with the CDs over there, and we said, no, Priscilla's definitely got this. So good morning. I'm honored to have been given the opportunity to kick off our theme for December, which is hope. Jim Harvin approached me a month or so ago and said, we've got these resources, and you can just pick a sermon and read it. And I said, Jim, I'll do you one better. I'll create my own. And he immediately said, don't plagiarize. Make sure you attribute whatever it is you're saying to yourself versus to the others. And it's interesting that he's not even here this morning. Considering that plausible deniability, I swear to you that I did not collude with anybody on this, the Russians or anybody else. This is mine together with the Touchstone resources. So hopefully you've had a chance to read some of those. They're very interesting. As some of you may know, about 5 years ago I took a break from my business career to pursue a math certification to teach and a math master's. And during that time, I kind of developed some really firm opinions on the state of math education in our country. From a practical perspective, I think that the math curriculums in America don't focus strongly enough on what I refer to as skills of calibration. What I mean by that is I don't think we do a good job of educating our youth on quantitative scale, especially with respect to things like probability, so that the kids can develop tools they need to make informed decisions as they grow older. They need to try to understand the likelihood of certain outcomes occurring, and that's really a mathematical thing, and I don't think we do a good job of teaching kids that. There are many examples. Personal finance. Do our youth understand that as they start to earn money, they need to pay themselves first so that they'll have some money when they retire? Health. Do young people really know the quantified risks associated with smoking, drug use, lack of exercise, bad nutrition? Education. Are students aware that the likely outcomes that they might experience should they choose to not take school seriously or, worse yet, drop out? These are things that can be looked at through the lens of understanding if you had a better grasp of some math. I wrote a paper in that master's program where historically probability has always been known as the, quote, mathematics of chance. And so I wrote a paper, informed by my opinions, where I called probability the mathematics of hope. To me, hope represents a more powerful foundational concept than chance. When students are taught probability that's synonymous with luck or with chance, they neglect to see that there are often ways to affect the odds and skew them in a more favorable direction. In addition to teaching kids through examples such as coin flips and dice rolls, whose individual probabilities we really can't influence unless we bring a loaded die or a loaded coin, I submit that it makes sense to put probability into a context of real-life decision-making where there is an opportunity to exert some control over the process to change the likelihood of achieving those results we might want. In fact, it's this notion of the ability to affect things that I think distinguishes hope from other positive sentiments such as wishing and optimism. As Reverend Kirk Lodeman Copeland writes in his introduction to the theme in the Touchstone resources, quote, "Hope is part of a continuum that includes wishing and optimism. Wishing focuses on something that we desire, we cast the wish into the universe, but we don't do anything to make the wish come true. Thus, wishing is passive. The most you have to do is give the wish a chance of becoming true is to blow out all of your birthday candles, and that doesn't get any easier the older you get. Optimism is the expectation that desired for results will in fact come into being. This attitude can be quite powerful as a source of motivation. When the sought-for outcome occurs, there's a sense of vindication of this orientation toward life. But optimism can be fragile, disappearing when the desired outcome doesn't come about. Hope is fundamentally different. It is resilient, enduring, courageous, and occasionally bold. Hope is a shapeshifter. It is an emotion and an attitude that keeps adapting to emerging circumstances." So his perspective is also shared by Bruce Marshall, who expresses the following in his book, Taking Pictures of God. "Hope is more resilient, more enduring, more helpful. In a serious illness, for example, there are often setbacks. In the face of these, optimism may wear down, but hope encourages us to move forward despite the setbacks. As we pursue our goals in life, optimism may lead us to expectations that are unrealistic and ultimately hurtful. Hope advises us to look squarely at the realities that confront us while remaining aware of the possibilities." Reverend David Bumbaugh delivered this poignant sermon that was in these resources I was able to look through on the topic of hope, where he recounted a lecture by Dr. Cornel West that he gave to the General Assembly of the UUA in 1994, where Dr. West referred to all of us as prisoners of hope. So I'll share an excerpt from that as well. "We live in a world awash in resources, but a world in which, nevertheless, millions are homeless and hungry and ill-clad, a world in which random violence is the daily experience of millions more, a world in which baseless prejudices and ancient hatreds inflict needless suffering and death on young and old alike, a world structured in such a way that whole generations and entire classes of human beings are treated as expendable, a world in which the poor see no future and the rich find little satisfaction, a world in which those who have nothing fear that the future will be no better, while those who have everything live in constant fear of the loss of what they have. In such a world, it is difficult to embrace an optimistic vision, to believe that somehow everything is ordered for the best. The alternative to simple optimism or desperate resignation is hope. Hope involves living in a spirit of expectation. To be a prisoner of hope, in Dr. West's words, is to be captured by a very special kind of expectation. The expectation which captures us is not that everything will work out for the best, not that our dreams will be realized and our ideas accomplished, not that the world will become what we want it to be. Rather, to be a prisoner of hope is to know that the world is neither defined by our fears nor limited by our dreams. To be a prisoner of hope is to see the world as it is, clearly and without romantic illusions, to feel its pain and its injustice and its inequity, to understand fully the distance between what is and what ought to be, and to give oneself to the work of narrowing that distance, not because we know what needs to be done, and not because we have assurance that it will make a difference, and not because we will reap the rewards of our efforts, but because by enlisting ourselves in the work of the world, we open up the possibilities of unexplored avenues, unanticipated alternatives, unexpected opportunities out of which some new thing may emerge. To be a prisoner of hope is to seek to ally oneself with the forces of renewal in a world where logic and reason suggest renewal is an impossible dream. So that's sort of the global perspective, and I believe we're going to hear more about that next week in the sermon for the guest speaker that's coming, as how does that relate to us as Unitarian Universalists and such. I want to add to that and kind of take it from the global perspective of it's an ugly world out there and we have to roll with it to more personalized, individualized, contextualized pieces of hope. So I'll join the folks that I've quoted and I'll share some personal perspectives on hope from my own background. A little known fact about me is I don't have much famous stuff going on in my lineage, but I am the great-grandson of a bona fide faith healer. His name was Antoine Tétrault, and he was my mother's grandfather, my mother's father's father. He was a carpenter by trade, but in the latter part of his life, he chose to focus on his healing full time. I never knew him. He died around the time I was born in the mid-'60s. He practiced in the late 30s, 40s, 50s. But I've heard many, many firsthand accounts of the miracles he's performed. I've brought some things here today, and we'll talk more about that in a second. Antoine was not the type of charismatic leader that you'd see on TV. He didn't slap inflicted congregants on the forehead in front of large televangelist crowds and watch them magically regain their sight or their hearing at that very instant. That's not what he did. His practice was rooted in a deep faith and prayer to the Virgin Mary and was characterized by persistence. People came from hundreds of miles away, which back then was a big deal, to visit him, to help them curb their suffering. Results were rarely, if ever, instantaneous. Oftentimes, those who came to see him prayed with him for weeks, months, or even years. While it may have taken time, the results, I think, can't be disputed. There was something going on. As you can see, these canes are just a very small sampling of the canes that were left behind by those who were healed. And you'll see over on the table, if you choose to take a look later, newspaper articles written up about him, as well as written testimonials to what he did to cure these folks or to help them through their ailments. There are dozens more of this stuff at my brother's house, in the crawl space of my aunt's house, which is where my grandparents used to live. I'm quite certain that Antoine didn't cure everyone he prayed with, but it certainly wasn't for lack of trying or lack of faith, or certainly not for lack of hope. As I try to make sense of what was happening back then, my scientific analytical leanings make me think that healing can be explained by mind over body, right? There's well-documented scientific links between the state of one's mind and one's physical health. Just think about how stress affects your body. I suspect others may choose to equate the healing power that I'm talking about to the supernatural in a form of spiritual mysticism. These contrasting explanations for my great-grandfather's healing remind me of a responsive reading that we heard at AviFest a couple weeks ago in this space. It is a house of truth-seeking, where scientists can encourage devotion to their quest, where mystics can abide in a community of searchers. I don't know if you remember that, but I saw it and I thought, that's appropriate. And whether you favor a more scientific or mystical explanation for the miraculous, I think we can all agree that Antoine Tétrault, my great-grandfather, he was a hope broker. He brokered hope. He helped the suffering cultivate the hope within themselves to affect more positive outcomes. His healing practice illuminates, to me, one of hope's most impressive feats, and it's how it resolves the conflict between the scientifically inclined and the divinely inspired. I think hope channels faith into action at the same time that it recognizes the need to marshal control over all factors that could affect a positive outcome, including the shift in definition of what a positive outcome may actually be as circumstances dictate. For my great-grandfather's work, it seems to reason that hope lives in all of us, even if we may need a little help bringing it to the surface in times of need. This theory was expressed more directly to me by my Uncle Danny, my father's brother. He's a Vietnam veteran and a true American war hero. Uncle Danny was a young Army second lieutenant assigned as a forward observer in the 4th Infantry Division in Vietnam. The exploits of his unit are described in detail in a 2010 book titled 12 Days in May. I'm not sure if you're familiar with what a forward observer is, but it's an incredibly dangerous position. The forward observer's job involves traveling ahead of the American troops in order to call in fire to where the enemy troops were hiding in the jungle. So the hazards of the job not only included being the first people to encounter the enemy, but it also included possible friendly fire from the troops from the fire you're calling in. 2/3 of all forward observers never returned from Vietnam. My uncle was in that minority of those lucky enough to make it. Knowing what he'd been through and the perilousness of his circumstance, I asked Uncle Danny for his unique perspective on hope, because he also, right now, and has been for 2 or 3 years, he's been going through cancer and getting treatment for cancer. So I thought he would have some interesting perspectives, so I'll quote him. If we who served in combat in Vietnam had no or little hope for being able to deal with our situations and ultimately return home to our family and lives, then it literally would not have been possible for us to perform our duties. For me, there was little active consideration for hoping we got our asses out of there intact. My closest buddy, who was killed in action, expressed to me shortly before he went down the hill with his platoon to set up a night ambush that he felt he was not coming back that night. I brushed it off and told him he was crazy, that we were all going home the same way we came. I've always been struck by his prescience. How did he lose hope, and was there any connection between his death and his attitude, or was it just coincidence? After his death, for a few days, I mourned him heavily, and I let hopelessness creep into my psyche, but I had to move past it for myself and for my guys. If I hadn't, I firmly believe I would not be here telling this story, either killed or in an insane asylum. So the upshot for me is hope is life. It is endemic to the human species. That is, we are born with it. It is when life intrudes that we sometimes temporarily lose hope. Reverend Lodman Copeland, who we heard from before, also weighs in on this concept of hopelessness in the Touchstone resources. While there is usually reason for hope, for some, capacity for hope is impaired. This is especially true for those who are experiencing depression. The hopelessness and utter despair is often beyond the reach of hope. Hope imagines goals that can be reached. Depression lacks that imagination. Finally, I'll offer up some advice from English comedian, writer, and actor Stephen Fry. If you know someone who's depressed, please resolve never to ask them why. Depression isn't a straightforward response to a bad situation. Depression just is. Try to understand the blackness, lethargy, hopelessness, and loneliness they're going through. Be there for them when they come through the other side. It's hard to be a friend to someone who's depressed, but it is one of the kindest, noblest, and best things you will ever do. This perspective is where we all come in. Hope is a commodity, albeit scarce sometimes, but nevertheless something that can be shared, something that can be offered as a gesture or a gift in time of need. The notion of sharing hope comports nicely with our action-oriented liberal religious tradition. In this winter season, as our days get shorter and the nights longer, be aware of those in your orbit who may be struggling to cling to their last hopes. Know that depression strikes hardest during the holidays. Remember that hope dies last, and an individual's circumstances are never as dire as they are when hope is lost. Even so, as my Uncle Danny suggests, hope can be restored. So reach out, listen, share your hope, and like my great-grandfather, you might be surprised at the miracles you too can perform.